It was not only about the life that you had abroad. It was also about the corruption, the nepotism, the politicization, the lack of merit that we usually see in our society. But once I joined service, the questions changed further. These barriers changed further. These barriers moved from merely the macroeconomic or the macro level issues of politicization and victimization to the issues of how our females, our girls, our boys are deprived of education, are deprived of basic necessities of healthcare. How are they not provided the freedom of speech or the freedom of movement? And that is something that I saw in my experience of over a decade in different areas of Pakistan. I've served as the assistant commissioner in the terror-struck region of Kuchlar. I was the first assistant commissioner to be posted there ever in the history of that particular place. That place did not know what an assistant commissioner was, what the interface of government and what the interface of state can be. So for me, it was a big responsibility to go there and overcome those particular barriers. But today, it's not about me. Today, I want to address the issue of how these barriers can be bridged. I will take you through all the stories of my experience of serving around the country from Kuchlar to the bustling capital city of Islamabad. And in these stories, I will tell you how we try to bridge those particular gaps, those barriers, and how we try to accomplish our goals. And then we'll move on to the idea of how you can accomplish these particular things. So we'll start off with the Gwadar experience. So in the experience of Gwadar, I was posted as a young officer. I was posted as the assistant commissioner of the port city of Gwadar. As soon as I got there, one important issue that I realized was that the parents, even though we had schools, even though we had educational institutions there, the parents were not willing to send their children to the schools. Upon inquiry, upon trying to understand what exactly was the issue, one important thing was the socio-cultural barrier. The idea of how an education, as opposed to working as a fisherman at that particular in Gwadar, and when I went to Quetta, working as a domestic labor in other houses, that was seemed more profitable or the better way to go about it rather than wasting your time on education. Another possible thing that I heard was the idea of the religious barrier of communication of how these children, or particularly girls, should go to school. Now, throughout your life, you're going to face certain barriers. Throughout your life, you're going to have those barriers of ideologies, barriers of finances, but you have to bridge them. So the idea started off with these barriers that I told you, that we had those educational institutions, but at that particular time, we saw that the people were not willing to send their children to school. We had negotiations with the parents, and one thing that we came up with was the idea of school feeding. The idea of school feeding is basically that you already are spending a particular amount of money to feed those children in the first place as well. Because we cannot change their ideology, we cannot change their beliefs, we cannot change their socio-cultural thoughts about sending the children to school. So what we did was we tried to talk to the people, tried to understand what the society wanted. And one thing that we came up with was that they were already spending a lot of money on feeding those particular children. Every household, you'd be surprised to hear that every household had almost 10 to 12 children. And that was a major economic barrier. In that particular regard, that is where you find the sphere of where you can create your impact. That is where we thought that if we create a mechanism whereby we give school lunch boxes or food in the schools that can mitigate the resources that are expended on the children, on their upbringing, on going to school, this can be a viable incentive. We started off with that particular idea, and you can see in front of us that within 2 months of starting the program, we saw that the parents were coming and they were dropping off their children to the schools. The enrollment increased manifold. And the idea was that once we took the first step, we saw that a lot of the people, a lot of the parents always wanted to send their children to school, but were always denied by socio-cultural, but more importantly, economic resources. Now, that is something that I want to stress here today. That we are going to face these barriers throughout our lives. But once you find your sphere, once you try to target a particular intervention, you'd find that a lot of people are standing with you. Another example that I'd like to take is the example of Kuchlat. From the example of Kuchlat, we saw I was posted in the terror-struck region, whereby a lot of the people there did not have access to those schools. Now, in Gwadar, I told you that the schools were present. However, the parents were not willing to send their children to those schools. In Kuchlat, we found a completely different barrier, and that is very interesting. So when I went to talk to the people in Kuchlat, and I gathered a few young students from Kuchlat, I asked them, what is the biggest concern that you have? So generally, what we would think is that in an area deprived of the basic necessities of life, they're going to say that our basic need is healthcare, our basic need is food, our basic need is infrastructure. But something very interesting that they said, and I'd like to have your attention to this. So one of the students stood up and he said that if you can make one project, the one project that we want is we want a library. And I started laughing, and I was very happy and amused to see that, because I was like, you guys in Allama Iqbal Medical University, or I throughout my life in different universities have never really taken libraries from the importance that they can be. But this student, and I asked him, I said, why exactly is the library so important for you? And his response was something that moved me. His response was, we need a library because we lack a single place which is safe, which has internet, which has access to books. And he said that we want to grow in the social ladder as well. So as you, we want to study as well, but we do not have the access to that particular facility. In that particular regard, my priorities changed. I saw that the barriers that we see in Lahore, the barriers that I saw in Cambridge, the barriers that I saw throughout the world, they change from place to place. But one thing that remains the same is the perseverance. One thing that remains the same is the steadfastness and the ambition to grow. So when those students came up to me and they said that they needed a library, the next step was how to create that library in the first place, because I started off this whole discussion saying that in Pakistan, getting your funds, getting access to your funds, even as an assistant commissioner, is so difficult that you have to go through such red tapeism. So we went on to create a crowdfunding campaign whereby people from all over the world started to pitch in money for that library, whereby the people, we created a community, a group of the local elders, and we said that everybody should pitch in with this library project. The reason why we did that was not for the money. The reason, what we see is very important in your life as well, is ownership. Taking ownership of anything that you want. So by allowing those local leaders to pitch in that particular project, we made them take ownership of that particular project, so that I may be transferred out. I may go anywhere. But this project, this library should be something that these people own, that these people value, that these people run. And in that particular time, within a span of 3 months, you'd be surprised that we created a public library. The first public library of Kuchlat that still continues to teach people, teach students, and a lot of them are studying for CSS and they might end up as an officer like me. Another example of the barriers that I would like to discuss here, that is this picture that is standing in front, that is right in front of you. This is the dilemma that I faced when I was posted as the Assistant Commissioner in Islamabad. Now, the reason I started off with my first posting of Gavadir was to tell you the dilemma and the barrier that I saw was that there were schools, but people were not sending their children to school. How to bridge that gap. The next example that I gave was the example of Kuchlak in Koita. The problem was we did not have schools. We did not have an infrastructure. And they had another issue, and we had a set of ways to highlight that. The third example that I want to give here today is something very interesting that I saw, and something that is relatable for you all as well. So that is the example of Islamabad. When I was posted in Islamabad, and many of you might have seen in the news as well, that there was a sector called E11 and that was flooded. And suddenly we just woke up early in the morning and suddenly we see pictures of Islamabad being flooded. A city that is known for its canals, a city that is known for its water systems, was flooded out of nowhere. Now, that was the dilemma as the Assistant Commissioner when I had to wake up and I had to get to these places and literally drag people out of the flowing rivers. At that time, this was a step for introspection. What was the barrier that we saw? The barrier that I saw in this was a major socio-cultural barrier. The people, as soon as the water levels went down, people started constructing low-cost housing or the slums near those particular waterways. And a lot of you might have been from Islamabad, a lot of you might have gone to Islamabad, you have seen, and the same we see in Lahore as well, that a lot of the waterways are encroached upon, and you have slums or you have lower cost housing that is obstructing the way. Since Islamabad had a very efficient water drainage system, a lot of the houses were constructed there. But this keeps on going on and on. Once we see one person constructing something wrong in Pakistan, it just keeps on going because you find that sense of immunity. And because of that, suddenly, out of nowhere, the waterways were blocked. And one day when we had a high level of rainfall, Islamabad was flooded. Now, this was the barrier that we saw, a major barrier that I saw in my civil service. How to address that? That is the most important way to go about it. For a lot of you, you may be younger than me, and you may be seeing a lot of the new technological advancements. So maybe your ideas are going to be even better than me. But when I went there, one thing that I introduced was a system of geomapping. Geomapping was basically through geographic mapping systems. We tried to identify in real time the houses that were being constructed on those particular waterways. As soon as we had an indication that an encroachment was being made, the administration acted upon that. So rather than going every single place again and again, one thing that we worked on was the idea of geomapping, so that through the use of satellite imagery, we can identify where encroachments are being made, and we can identify and we can focus our efforts accordingly. Now, the reason I stressed on all these three examples is to give you one particular theme, a theme that I followed in my life. I studied from Cambridge University. I went to UC Berkeley and came back to Pakistan to pursue my CSS exam. One thing that I had in my mind was never the idea that I can change this country, was never the idea that me alone can bring a revolution. But I always had an idea that you have a particular sphere. You might not be able to change the world, but you might be able to change the world for that one somebody who needs you the most. Those little children in Gavadir who went to school after our school funding campaign, we were able to change the world for them. Those students who are studying for CSS in Kuchlak Library, I might not be able to change the world for everybody. I might not be able to break the barriers for everybody, but we broke the barriers for them. Those people in Islamabad who used to drown, those people, those lives, precious lives that used to die, that used to be wasted because of lack of management, because of one important intervention, those lives are saved. A lot of you might be thinking that you might be joining the civil service. So that is very important for you to understand that when you look at the barriers, the barrier of nepotism, the barrier of politicization, the barrier of corruption, do not deter yourself. Do not think that because of that, you're not going to achieve your goal. Because of that, you're not going to join civil service and contribute to Pakistan. But think about the sphere of influence where you can assert yourself, where you can do good to the people. These barriers should not be a reason whereby you do not come back to Pakistan, you go to a country abroad and you contribute there. But there should be a reason to increase your motivation and perseverance to contribute. My story, when I resigned from abroad, came back to Pakistan, my idea was that let's try to do something that is difficult. Let's try to do something where I can contribute to this country in any particular manner. Doing CSS, a lot of you might be thinking about it as well. Or topping CSS per se. There is not a particular formula for that. One thing that is needed is your dedication. One thing that a lot of you here who might be able to achieve their goals is ambition. And ambition is what allows you to break those barriers. And one thing that I would like that you all should know before you leave from here. One thing that one crux that I've learned from all my service in disparate cities and regions across this country is that there would always be barriers to growth. You just need to find the right space where you can assert yourself and create a positive impact. And when you find that right space and when you take that first step, believe me, you would find so many others standing in the line there to support you. And with that, I would like to conclude this discussion. But it was a pleasure to be here, and I hope to see you all contributing in this country in any way that you can, and hope to inspire the youth of Pakistan. Thank you, everybody.